Welcome to our Reddit mega compilation. This video compiles all of the strange tales that have come from Reddit. This month has been a little rough for Jiff and I, with a new school semester, prepping for Debunktober, and assorted life problems. We weren't able to post as much as we usually do, but we wanted to give you something to watch while we work on other videos. New content is coming soon, but for now, enjoy this complete Reddit mystery binge.
Hi, and welcome to Debunk File. My name is Sep, and today we're going to be talking about the Reddit user crazysonthrowoff. The world of Reddit is one filled with mystery and intrigue, and a large reason for that is because there is a subreddit for basically anything you can possibly imagine. That's great if you were interested in a ton of stuff like us, but it's also a double-edged sword, as the weirdos that scour the internet also get to look and post about practically anything they want. One of the subreddits that has always attracted a lot of attention is the Confessions subreddit. Now, the title is self-explanatory. If you have a confession that you want to get off your chest, just post it here. This place has simple confessions like, I've never solved the Rubik's Cube before, and there are also deeper confessions about serious issues in an individual's life. However, there is that third boat that floats around, and I like to call it the really strange confessions boat, and today I will be sharing one of the posts that I have found. The title of the post reads, I stood by and allowed my wife to almost kill our son. I was happy she did it. And wow, yeah, that's pretty weird to say the least. Now, this is a very long post, and since it needs to be read in its entirety to be solved, what I decided to do was bring in a couple of awesome channels and just read this post in its entirety for you. And after that's done, we will talk about it. So sit back, get nice and comfy in your chair or bed, or wherever you are, grab some popcorn, and let's do this.
Okay, fair warning, this one is long as hell, apologies for that, but this is very hard for me, and I've been carrying it around for a lot of years. On the advice of my therapist, I've written it all out to try and work out my feelings on it. He didn't advise me to submit it to Reddit, of course, but I have struggled with this for a long time, and I need to hear other people's opinions on it. I still really have no idea how I feel about it, even after all these years, but I will submit for judgment by the masses. I know I did wrong on some things, probably a lot of things. I tried to do my best that I could. My son was very troubled. Very troubled. If you've seen the movie We Need to Talk About Kevin, it will really help to understand what I'm talking about. Because I swear to God, when I watched that film, I thought I was watching a documentary on my life. I felt the writer must have had cameras hidden in my damn house. That's how accurate it was. The only difference in that movie, the boy appears normal to his father and only reveals his true nature to his mother. With my son, he didn't have that mask. His insane behavior was the same with everyone. From the day he was born, my son just came out wrong. He was planned. My wife and I tried to get pregnant and were ecstatic when he was born. He was wanted and loved. We showered affection on him and really tried to give him a happy childhood. But from the day we brought him home from the hospital, he was miserable. He cried for 13 months straight. I'm not exaggerating, 13 months without a break. He cried until he had no voice left and kept crying. You could see his little face scrunched up and no sound coming out. There were times where he would literally be crying in his sleep. I've never seen or heard any other kid able to do that. We brought him to the doctors, specialists, tried changing his diet, held him, rocked him, toys, swaddling, music, mobiles, everything you could think of. Nothing worked. 13 months of grating, grinding, no sleep hell. Once he got over the crying stage, we thought we were out of the woods, but it quickly became clear that for some unknown reason, he was just angry at being alive. I never saw that kid have a genuine joyous smile once in the time I knew him. I saw him grin, a vicious, horrible grin many times, taking a perverse pleasure from causing pain or suffering on breaking a rule. But a smile from real pleasure at something nice? No, never. Not once. He had no interest in anything positive. He was fueled by hate, and everything he did was bent towards that. As soon as he could talk, his mission in life was to destroy things. He would break or try to break anything that came in his range. Smash it, chew it, throw it in the toilet, whatever he could. After a while, he figured out how to get his diaper off and took great pleasure in pooping and pissing anywhere he could. After a while, he figured out how to hide it and started pissing and pooping in places he wouldn't find right away, grinding it into the carpets, making it even more of a problem to clean and make the house stink. When he got older, ages 9 to 15, he would piss and crap in our bed until we got a lock on the door and he wasn't able to get in anymore. Then he'd just take a dump in the hallway in front of our room. That biological warfare started at around 2.5 years old, and he never grew out of it. I'll try to speed it up, as I could literally go on for days about this stuff, but as he grew older, he became more and more unmanageable. He would bite, kick, scream, scratch, and spit at anyone trying to do anything with him. He was kicked out of school twice before he was 9, then let him back in and then kicked him out for good. He had to change schools. The next one put him in a special class that kept him away from the other students. We had to install a door and a lock on the kitchen because he would steal knives and use them to gouge the walls, furniture, and chase people around with them. He was 10, he stabbed me pretty good in the hip and ass. I still have scars. As he grew older, he grew darker. He moved into setting things on fire and torturing local animals. There was a stray dog that hung out around the park near our house. My son blinded it in one eye with a barbecue fork. He would dip cats' tails in gasoline and light them on fire. He became a violent, stinking, vicious beast that lived in our house. We couldn't do anything with him. I will take this opportunity to preempt the tsunami of messages. Yes, we had the kid in therapy. He saw a psychiatrist twice a week and had God knows how many different medications prescribed to him over the years. Nothing worked. Therapy didn't work, meds didn't work, nothing worked. He was like a poison cloud of hate and fury lashing out at anything in his reach. When my son was 16, my wife got pregnant again. I can't tell you how different our reaction was. Instead of joy, we felt horror. This pregnancy had not been planned, and we really were at a loss over what to do. My son had been such an unending nightmare for 16 years. We couldn't take the idea of starting again from the beginning. We talked a lot about terminating. But A, access to abortion was not easy in those days as it is now, and B, my wife was very against it. We talked about my options. In the end, we decided that my wife would have the baby, and if it turned out evil, we would put it up for adoption. We knew we just couldn't do it again with another child like our son. We had a daughter. She was normal. Suddenly we saw what our lives should have been like the whole time, how things would have been had our son not been himself. She laughed at things. She breastfed without biting. She didn't have any teeth anyway, but you could tell she was just trying to eat, not tear her mum's breast off. After 4 months, she was sleeping through the night. She was happy. She was normal. I can't describe the relief of happiness we both felt. I don't have the words for it. This is where I believe I may have started really pulling back from my son. Up until that time, whatever mistake I made, I had always tried to do my best for my son. I am convinced of that. I tried to help him and love him and care for him. I really tried. But when my daughter was born, my wife and I both instinctively just turned towards her. She became our focus. Not from malice, but just because she was so much easier. She was so happy and sweet. Every moment we were with her was like magic. I understand this was wrong, but we honestly couldn't help it. I don't have a better explanation for that. My son hadn't cared about my wife being pregnant. I honestly don't know if he really understood it. But when we brought our daughter home, he started acting out even more. I didn't think it was possible, but he took it up another notch. At this time he was 17, and we were having blowout screaming matches daily. Usually, after we fought, he would storm out of the house and disappear for hours at a time, or come back the next morning. It was a relief. I started to actually look forward to our fights, because it would get him away from us for a while. After the birth of our daughter, my relationship with my son was almost entirely gone. Our only real interactions were screaming at each other. My wife was even worse with him. She just had nothing left. By that time, if our son ever came into the same room as her, she would just stop whatever she was doing and start screaming, "Get away from me, get away, get out," until he left. He started spending more and more time out of the house, which was a blessing for us. I have no idea what he got up to out in the world, but we were just happy it wasn't being inflicted on us. As a consequence of our son's behavior, we had invested heavily in locks around the house. All of the cheap, thin interior doors in our home had been replaced with thick, dense wood doors that couldn't be kicked through, equipped with keyed locks that my wife and I carried. I know it sounds extreme, but locks and heavy doors were the best way to create safe spaces from him. And again, before I'm inundated with messages, I was not locking my son in rooms like a prisoner. He had free reign of the house and could go as he pleased. My wife and I would lock ourselves in rooms to protect ourselves from him. If anything, we were the prisoners of our own home.
On this day in question, I had fought with my son in the morning and he had left the house in a rage. My wife and I were enjoying some peace and quiet in the kitchen while our daughter napped in our bedroom. And then my daughter began crying. Any parent who has a young child can tell you, you get used to the sound of your child's cries, and you can tell after a while what they need. They cry differently if they are hungry or need changing, or they're just restless and want to be held. Babies can communicate pretty well before they can speak. This cry was none of those things. This cry was terror, pure terror. The second we heard it, my wife and I were both up and out of our chairs and running to the room. The door was locked, of course, and it took a few seconds to get the key right in. When we opened it, we couldn't believe it. My son was in the room. We lived in a bungalow, and the bastard had climbed in the window to get to her. He was standing over her crib with a steak knife in his hand. I have no idea where he got it. It wasn't one of ours. We controlled our knives very carefully and always kept them in locked drawers. I think he may have stolen it from one of our neighbors' houses. He had broken her skin twice already, once in the belly area and once on her arm. I could see blood running down. When I entered the room, he was dragging the back of the knife down her face, not cutting, almost tickling, teasing her while she screamed. He looked up at us and smiled. Before I even knew what I was doing, I was already moving, running to put myself between them. I didn't think about it, I just moved instinctively. Even with that, my wife got there faster. It was like a movie on fast forward. She got to our son and bashed his hand away and threw her whole body weight against him, knocking him away from the crib and bouncing him off the wall. I picked up my daughter and held her while my wife screened us. I could see her shaking, almost convulsing. I can remember the smell of the room, the sound of my daughter screaming and wailing, the look on my son's face as he stood there. Just nothing. Blank. Dead. There was nothing in his eyes. No emotion. He looked like an alien to me. I watched my wife take a step forward toward him. I could have reached out and stopped her, but I didn't. She stepped forward again, very close to him, and I could have stopped her again, but I didn't. She waited looking at him for maybe 3 to 5 seconds without moving, and then she punched him in the face. Now, until this point, you may have been picturing my wife as a typical woman, small frame, dainty, delicate. This is not the case. My wife does have a small frame, but dainty and delicate, she is not. Never has been since I've known her. Since her early teens, my wife has been a boxer. MMA didn't exist back then, but karate and boxing were big in those days, and my wife was a very talented amateur. She was about 130 pounds, she carried a lot of muscle, and she knew how to punch. I had 70 pounds on her back then, and I have no doubt that in a real fight between me and her, she could have and would have pounded me flat. Neither of us had ever laid a hand on our son in anger before, but something broke in her that day, and all the years of anger, pain, sorrow, and frustration just came pouring out. When she hit him, his head snapped back and blood started pouring out of his nose. He hardly reacted. He just looked at her with this shocked expression like he didn't know how to process what had just happened. She waited another second, and then she hit him again. I could have reached out and stopped her. I could have dragged her out of the room, taken her away, calmed her down, but I didn't. I just stood there and watched while she systematically started to pound him to a pulp. Every time he brought his hands to cover one part, she would blast him somewhere else. Body, head, over and over. He started screaming, crying out, yelling for her to stop. It's the most genuine reaction I'd ever seen him have to anything in his whole life. But she wasn't stopping. I watched her ramping up, hitting harder, faster, working him like a heavy bag. He tried to swing at her, and she slipped him easily. She was on autopilot, sinking down into her training. I stood there watching for a minute. Then I turned my back on them and took my daughter out of the room. I brought my daughter to the kitchen and gave her a bath in the sink. I found that he had cut her a third time, on the sole of her foot. All the cuts were superficial, but I cleaned her up and held her until she calmed. I put polysporin and band-aids on her cuts. In our bedroom, I could hear my son screaming, calling my wife horrible names, telling her he would cut her head off and rape her. After a while, I didn't hear him saying anything anymore. Didn't even hear him crying out. I assumed that he must have been knocked out, but I could still hear her beating him. That went on for a long time. Long enough for my daughter to drift off to sleep in my arms. I just sat at the kitchen table waiting for her to finish. Finally, she came out and sat down across from me. Her hands were swollen and red. Her face and arms were splattered with blood. Her chest was heaving. We just stared at each other without saying anything. After a while, I asked her, "Is he dead?" She looked back at me and answered, "I hope so." I nodded. That was all there was to say about that. I understood how she felt perfectly. I felt the same. I didn't know what to do, so we just sat there waiting silently. Eventually my wife started crying and went to go take a shower. I just stayed there holding our daughter. After a long while, I heard moaning and sobbing coming from our room. It turned out that my son wasn't dead. I went in to see how bad it was, and it was pretty bad. I've never seen a more merciless beating laid onto anyone, before or since. He was lying on the floor, rolling around with blood leaking out of his face, lying in a pool of vomit. His nose was squashed flat out across his face. Both of his eyes were completely swollen shut and started to blacken already. I could see that a couple of his fingers were bent out at weird angles and he had pissed his pants. I think he must have been missing teeth, but I couldn't see any on the floor, and I couldn't see inside of his mouth. His lips were all puffed up and swollen. From talking to my wife about it later, I know now that she had systematically beaten every part of his body, focusing heavily on his legs. She told me she kicked him in the groin repeatedly until her legs got tired and had kept beating his body long after he had passed out. When my wife came out of the shower, I still didn't know what to do about our son. I didn't know whether to call the police or an ambulance, take him to the hospital myself. I honestly had no idea what I was supposed to do. After a while, I realized that I simply didn't care what happened to him anymore, and we decided to just let him live or die on his own. There was an in-law suite in the basement that we had never really used, and my wife, my daughter, and I just moved down there. We simply ceded the top floor of the house to my son and locked everything down, separating our lives entirely. There was plenty of food in the upstairs cabinets, enough for a couple weeks or more. He had a washroom and bedrooms to use. We had a washroom in the basement, a small kitchenette, and a separate entrance, so we just stopped going upstairs. We just decided we were done with him. I figured we'd let his food run out and see what happened. Over the next week, we could hear him moving around upstairs sometimes. I think he just spent most of his time lying in bed recovering. I went to work, watching on high alert in case he attacked me in the driveway, but he never did. My wife stayed home with our daughter. She was never out of our sight. One night, we heard him going ballistic, smashing things and banging. We didn't respond. He never tried to get downstairs or get near us, though. I think he was afraid that if he got near us, my wife might finish the job on him. After 3 weeks down in the basement, we hadn't heard anything from above for a few days, and I ventured upstairs to the main floor of the house. The place was demolished, and there was no sign of my son. He was gone. It took months to repair the damage he had done and get the main floor back to normal again. There was food and feces smeared all over the walls and broken glass on the floor, big holes in the drywall. He had ripped the place apart. He tore up the linoleum in the corner of the kitchen and emptied an entire foam fire extinguisher into the living room. I feel thankful that he didn't burn the house down with us in it. I'm honestly not sure why he didn't. The kid wasn't shy about lighting things on fire. After that, I lived in fear every day that he would come back, that he would ambush us out of the blue and try to kill us. We moved house about 3 years later, and I finally stopped being afraid that he would show up again, as now he had no idea where we were. I finally felt safe from him. All this happened a long time ago. My son was born in the spring of 1971. My daughter was born in 88, and I'm an old man now. I'll be 70 this year, and my wife passed from cancer in 2016. My daughter is 31 now. I moved in with her and her husband after my wife passed. I've got 2 granddaughters, and they are the joy of my life. I see a therapist a couple times a month to talk about all this. I don't know where my son is. The last time I saw him was when he was lying on the floor of our bedroom, bleeding and smashed. I haven't heard from him since he left, more than 30 years now. I don't want to. I carry a lot of guilt from that time and a lot of conflicted emotions. I didn't beat him myself, but I allowed him to be beaten, and I thought he deserved it. I was happy it happened. I didn't try to kill him, but I would have been happy if he had died. I will say that I hope he was able to overcome his demons and go live a normal life somewhere. If he wasn't able to do that, if he stayed the way he was, then I truly do hope someone out there killed him. When I knew him, he was a rabid dog, and whichever way it went, I just hope he still isn't out there hurting anyone else.
Wow, that was the single most insane thing I have ever read. But of course, there is a bright glaring question in the forefront of all your minds right now, including mine, and this is, was this real? Well, let's find out. What I'm gonna do is put the arguments in favor for each side. What I mean by that is I will explain how it could possibly be genuine, and then show why it could possibly be fabricated, and finally come up with the conclusion. I'm going to start with the reasons why the story could be real, and that is simply a condition called ODD, which stands for Oppositional Defiant Disorder, the definition for it being a disorder in a child marked by defiant and disobedient behavior to authority figures. One of the comments under the post said that if you Google accounts of children with ODD, every read is a trip. And yeah, I read some accounts of children with this disorder, and they are actually crazy. While this could possibly be the case, while researching I did notice that I didn't find a case that lasted nearly as long as it lasted here, and there were other Redditors that commented about other people with ODD turning themselves around. So if this is real, this might not be the case of ODD, and could be a case of something more extreme, such as full-on sociopathy or psychopathy. Now onto the reasons as to why this story may be in fact a hoax. And I'm gonna start with some small things, like the age of the man. He is 69 years old, which is definitely a rare age to be using social media and writing a post like this. Again, this is kind of a nitpick, and it could be true, but you just don't normally see this. I think that the beating portion of the story and onward sounds ever so slightly fabricated too. It was shown with great detail that this person was beat to a pulp, and the police never got wind of this. Also, after he was absolutely obliterated and they moved to the basement, and they only stayed there for 3 weeks before he vanishes without a trace. Forever. I don't know about you, but after hearing just how bad he got beat up, I wouldn't think that he even been close enough in a condition to leave in just 3 weeks. Another reason this may be possibly fabricated is that it's just so well written, maybe even a little too well written. I don't know if this sounds like another absurd piece of criticism, but it's structured extremely well and feels like something that was planned out for a long time. The username simply being crazysonthrowoff doesn't exactly help either. I don't see an old man making a Reddit username like that. It sounds almost like an alt account. Some might say that this even reads like a story on r/nosleep, which is a popular subreddit dedicated to telling creepy stories, so why not post it there? Well, on No Sleep, it is known that practically everything posted is fake. The Redditors here clearly didn't want this story to feel fake, so why would they post it there? Also, the Confession subreddit doesn't have many stories of this length, and the No Sleep subreddit does. So if we posted that story on No Sleep instead, it probably wouldn't have garnered nearly as much traction as it received in the Confession subreddit. And again, like mentioned earlier, it wouldn't be regarded as true on there either like he wants. This is most likely just a very talented writer who has had a passion to write this out for a while. It was posted on Reddit with the intention of raising an eyebrow and turning heads, and I'm willing to bet that the reactions he has gotten so far are the exact reactions he was envisioning. So after going through everything, it seems that we have debunked this mystery. I don't see anything in the future contradicting these claims that were just made right here. The only way this entirely shifts is if he comes out with a ton of proof regarding the situation, but that's highly unlikely. If he does though, believe me, we will be here to update you for sure. Hi, and welcome to Debunk File. My name is Sep, and today we're going to be talking about The Door. Very recently, we decided to cover a mystery on Reddit, and it really was a long time coming. Reddit has some very intriguing mysteries out there, and that's because obviously you can post whatever you want. Last time we talked about an insane story, but this one is a little different. It's not a story at all, rather a picture with a very short caption. Previous owner of new house blocked this hidden basement room off with a shelf. Door does not lead outside. Attached with that is this image, and naturally, it instantly sparked discussion. This is an ominous image, so the post blew up fairly fast. Obviously, everyone was wondering what the hell was inside that door, and we received a few updates, all in the form of replies. The first of which was to someone simply telling him to open it, prompting him to say, "Likewise, horror movies have taught me that questions posed are always scarier and more interesting than any answer I can get out of it. So that is staying closed. Also, my dogs won't go anywhere near the door, so I am doubly not opening it." So that makes me wonder, why won't the dogs go near it? It's very strange. Perhaps it's his psyche. He made a lot of replies after this, with most of them saying pretty much the same things like, "The mystery is always better than the end result, and I'll open it eventually." Thing is though, he never did open the door. This post was made 4 months ago, and we were yet to see behind the barricaded door. He hasn't made a post in 4 months, and he hasn't even left a single comment in 4 months either. With him being gone for this amount of time, people started to worry. Was the force behind the door evil? Is he dead? Is he missing? The internet got really worried for this guy, so what we are going to do today is attempt to answer 2 questions. What happened to the original poster, and what is behind the door? Let's start with the first question. What happened to the original poster? Well, believe it or not, I don't think he's dead. Honestly, I see the insane reactions as people seriously blowing this way out of proportions. A quick look through his comments and post history would give you 2 very simple answers. While looking through, I noticed a very important comment. Somebody asked him why he bought a house and he didn't look through every room, prompting the poster to respond with, "If I bought it, I'd check it out immediately. I ain't dying over a rental." This really explains a lot. The house being a rental perfectly explains why he didn't stress over the room, because if this was a house I owned, I'd have to check it out. Besides this, there is an even larger reveal that is seen when you simply scroll through his post history, and that is the frequency in which he posts. You see, he never was the most active guy in the world. He would have stretches where he posted a solid amount, but there are also stretches where there were no posts or even comments for months. A lot of the replies do show that he is frustrated by the replies pleading him to look into the door, so it seems perfectly fathomable that since it was just a rented place and it didn't matter too much to him, he just left the door shut and went off Reddit, like he clearly has done in the past. So yeah, as far as the original poster goes, he's probably living your average life. It was a rented place and the borderline harassment of the post had him sign off Reddit, which was a thing he did in the past quite a bit. But now, let's move on to the second mystery. What was behind that door? First off, we're gonna start with what we usually do in these sorts of situations, and that is, it was staged. Who knows, maybe this was a set that he just took a picture of and posted it, knowing it would get a reaction. Usually this is the most logical explanation, but this is one of the rare cases where I really believe it to be true. Also, as a side note, reverse image searches yield no results, so this is an original picture and not just something taken offline. I'm not ruling out the scenario that it is actually fake, but I do think there are stronger theories. The first of which coming from a comment on the post stating that if the bank owned the house between the last owner and him, they probably just put stuff the property company was supposed to throw out in it. This is a very simple answer, but definitely makes sense. As far as the whole creepy my owner barricaded the door thingy goes, I don't see it being true at all. This shelf looks like it just fell over. If it were to be picked up without moving at all, it would very clearly be standing flat against the wall, so it definitely seems to just simply fallen over. This coincidental shelf placement also leads me to believe that there is just simply nothing in here at all. We know now that the shelf wasn't put there on purpose, so with him renting an apartment, which would presumably be empty, the chance that this room in the basement is also empty is very, very, very high. So yeah, this mystery is easily debunked. The internet most definitely freaked out over this event, but doing the proper research would show you that he doesn't post that often, only rented the place and got annoyed at the comments. The guy is probably just living a normal life now, and the basement room either had old furniture in it, or nothing at all. We won't ever truly know what was in that room, but the chances of it being something sinister or interesting really is very low. And that's it.
Hi, and welcome to Debunk File. My name is Sep, and today we're going to be talking about the incredibly strange post that was recently found on r/RBI. This is the mystery of u/Ezekiel46J. Now, on this channel, we have dealt with our fair share of Reddit mysteries already, and they've always led to some of our favorite mysteries that we have covered. I think the reason Reddit can lead to topics that end up being so intriguing is simply due to the anonymous nature of the platform. And while it's not like 4chan where you are literally anonymous, it's still very easy to share astonishingly personal things without embarrassment or fear. This sharing of information leads to the platform having such a wide array of people. You can find regular everyday people getting or giving life advice, you can find comedic scenarios, and on the other side of the coin, you can find the tragedies and horror stories. The mystery we will be talking about today is, of course, one of those. Very recently, a post blew up on r/RBI, which, as the name of the subreddit suggests, it's the FBI but done by Reddit. This sub actively solves real-world mysteries daily, and searching for help, a user by the name of Ezekiel46J created the post.
I want to find other people who came from the place that I did.
This post has gone semi-viral already due to the disturbing nature of it, vividly explaining a place that the original poster grew up in, and we're going to read all of it. So without further ado, let's get into this.
I'm not good at remembering things from so long ago, but I'm gonna try. I grew up in rural Alabama. Our place was a bigger house that looked more so like a barn with a bunch of rooms in it. The place was past a forest and near a big cliff, and that's all I remember from the location. I don't think we had an address, but I would have not paid attention enough to see one. We weren't near any other people for probably a couple of miles. Everything was run down and falling apart. There was barely any electricity and only water sometimes, but even that wasn't much. Very low money area, and what I always knew was that there was other places like ours, and I knew of the second, 1st, 11th, 9th, and mine, which was the 6th. They were all down south. I didn't know if there were others in Alabama, but I knew 2 of them that were in Virginia and Louisiana. They had the name that sounded like Lagoon, but not quite. We weren't allowed to leave. They were absolute backwards people. The other places, though, I heard had it even worse, because they had an obsession with angels and the devil. Ours, not as much. There were around 30 adults, and kids a little less. The kids were mean as hell to each other, and all the grown-ups did was screw. I knew words to speak, but I didn't know what they meant in reading, and I couldn't write for shit. We had to use wet paper to scrub our teeth clean. The girls used old towels when they were bleeding, but some just let themselves bleed. I only had 2 shirts and 1 pair of shorts, and nobody ever got their clothes cleaned. I didn't even know my middle or last name or the day I was born. We got food every few days, but I always had something wrong with it. That was just a few things of what it was like for us. I left in 1975 when I was 12. I went with my best friend and another girl who wanted to leave too. And another kid I picked up the messes from was supposed to come, but he disappeared from behind us. I went to Virginia to find the 11th one because I had been there before. What made me do this is because I learned I had a brother who died alone in one of them when he was 12. He was disabled and they hurt him. They took his mother from him because they thought he was born with horns. I want to find others like me so I can know more about where we came from and what it was like for us. Maybe even find the ones I knew if they were still there. The only good lead I got is the one from Virginia was from Sperryville. It was hidden off, but there was a mark in a tree. I don't know what the place looks like now or if it's even there anymore. I'm not good with this stuff, and sorry this is all messy. My wife uses this site before and said it's good at helping. Thanks for anything.
Before jumping into this mystery at all, I just wanted to make some comments on the post in general. Basically, there were 2 things that I found really important about this post. 1, the grammar is consistently awful. In the post, he seems to have a valid explanation for this too, as according to him, he didn't really learn how to read or write here. The other thing of importance I wanted to go over was the one line where he mentions leaving in 75 when he was 12. The 75 there most definitely is referring to 1975, which I wanted to clear up since there was actual confusion as to what the original poster meant here. I also wanted to create basically a list of important info about the place he was in, because after this we are going to go over a surplus of potential leads, so having all of this information organized here is going to make it much easier to figure out what leads are tangible and which leads aren't. So, this takes place in rural Alabama. The house that he stayed in was shrouded in a forest, and was more like a barn than a house. It was very trashy, without stable electricity or even drinking water. The most important detail is that there are over a dozen places like this all owned by the same company, spanning multiple states such as Virginia and Louisiana, with a name that sounded like Lagoon. It's also important to add that they marked trees. Now, that's all the really important information that we can get from the post itself, but the original poster has actually been incredibly active ever since the post was made, and has answered tons of great questions that undoubtedly will help us in the search, because he relays a ton of really important information. The first major piece of importance I found in his comments was that this place, or places, was in fact created by a woman, and while she was the creator, she wasn't necessarily a leader like how it is in most cults. This detail will unquestionably narrow our search down. He also still remembers some of the adult names, which all had religious ties, as you can see here. Here's one of the really dark parts. This place consistently beat him and even drugged him. They also had weapons on them at all times. But one comment that we must show is his very detailed remembrance of what exactly the place was like on the inside.
Most kids didn't have parents with them, and over the years I've been thinking more that they might have been taken. Babies were born there, but sometimes I just see an adult coming up with their hand around the back of the kid's neck. Maybe they were just given up or found. I was actually the odd one out because I had my dad. I think what rules there varied from place to place, but from what I heard about the others, I think ours was the most lax. I can't remember the things about God that they told us, but they had a state of mind like they were being held hostage. I could not tell if they believed what they were saying. They'd just yell all crazed and it felt freaky. It was an obsession. The thing with the religion was that they had lots of emphasis on angels. It was like they switched the roles of sins with angels. There was a woman who would fall apart at random, and she didn't want to be an angel. People would just go ballistic. I can't even begin to guess what it was all about. They were paranoid all the time. They threatened us with shotguns if they found out we went in the forest because there were angels. I feel like there's some symbolism in that. My dad in specifics had it the worst. I think he had this complex relationship with God and was obsessed and afraid, but felt a hatred for him. It's hard to talk about, but he would hurt himself so bad because he was afraid of what God would take from him if he didn't. Sometimes he called himself the devil. I lost him to this, and after I left, I wondered if I was the devil because it all started with him after I was born. Everybody had something wrong. I was so normal to it that when I started seeing emotions of regular people, I didn't get them. When the women didn't dress provocatively, somebody would always have something to say. The men were violent. They didn't want much from us, but when they did, you had to do it, or you would be beat to a pulp. Sex was all the time, everybody and kids. Even I started too early. My mom had me at middle school age. Everything felt the opposite. It didn't feel like God.
So yeah, that's a lot of information, but that's good. It's really gonna help us with our search. Now, obviously, tons of people think it's a cult. So what we did was search up some cults from Alabama to see what we could find. The first cult we found that had some striking similarities would have to be the 12 Tribes cult. This is now a worldwide organization, but it wasn't always that way. It was founded in 1972 in the south of Tennessee specifically. It did have places in Alabama as well as some other southern states in its infancy. They also had a history of child abuse, and had symbols just like the original poster said. But by far, the most striking similarity had to go to the religious naming that the original poster mentioned. The 12 Tribes cult baptized you and gave you a Hebrew name, and when looking up all the names that the original poster mentioned here, I saw that each and every one of them were Hebrew. In fact, even the name Ezekiel is Hebrew. But while the original poster said that this place he was in was religious, that wasn't really what it was all about. Unlike 12 Tribes, where that was the entire basis of it. 12 Tribes also did not have places in the middle of forests like his group did, at least from what I've read, and actually operated multiple delis and bakeries. They did have hostels, but the thing about this cult is that they aren't secretive at all. These hostels, delis, and bakeries are actually very easy to find, so the likelihood that the cult he was in was 12 Tribes is slim to none. Also, like we stated earlier, the original poster was actually injected with some sort of drug, and so were the rest of the residents. The next group that came to the minds of many was the House of Judah. When looking into what House of Judah is, there were some striking similarities. I found a personal story about what House of Judah was like, and well, let's take a look. In the 1970s, a wife and her husband were looking for a place to belong. They heard about a man who led religious classes and had a weekly radio program. He would eventually set up a community which this husband and wife would join. Things were apparently normal at the start, but then things went completely downhill. It started when they were completely cut away from their families under the reasoning that this was their family. In the early 1980s, things would get truly serious. The leader had people sign waivers to accept punishments, which in the original poster's case was very common for him. This new punishment action all culminated in 1983, where a 12-year-old kid died as a result from these punishments. This made national headlines, prompting the group to flee to rural Alabama, where it's unknown as to whether or not they continued their ways down there. So, right off the bat, there are a number of similarities here. This group started in the 1970s, they had severe punishments, and the most striking similarity is that the original poster's brother was also 12 when he died. But it's still not the House of Judah, for the simple fact that the timeline doesn't at all match up. In the mid-1970s, when the original poster left the place, he was already being beaten, and in House of Judah, the beating started in the 80s. They also didn't move to Alabama until the mid-80s as shown earlier, which completely counts out House of Judah. The original poster also mentioned his places being owned by a woman, and the owner of House of Judah was a man. So yeah, it's safe to say that he was most definitely not part of the House of Judah. Consider this theory debunked. A popular theory is that it was some sort of homeless camp, and the most popular reasoning for this is because the symbol in the tree, as many homeless camps use symbols in that way. As for the injections, it's clear that if this was really some sort of homeless camp, they were all really drugged up psychos, which could maybe explain the behavior, but that doesn't really do it for me. If these were addicts, what would they gain out of injecting this stuff to children? All that does is leave less for themselves. Also, if these people were all homeless, how did they have electricity? Original poster says it was limited, but still, if there was any at all, somebody was paying, which would rule out the theory that this was a homeless camp. But there's one other major possibility for what could be going on here. I am a skeptic, so I couldn't just leave out the possibility that this story right here is all merely a work of fiction. The creation date of the user is explained by him, but it's still a red flag. It definitely looks like this account was created specifically for the purpose of creating this elaborate story. Another red flag is the grammar. We mentioned way earlier that it's, well, awful, and this is because he didn't learn how to write. But I can't help but feel it's pretty cliche southern vocab grammar, if that makes any sense. It just feels like writing someone would make if they tried to convince us they were from the South. And I don't think I buy it. This, coupled with the creation date and the fact that more of these posts have begun popping up as of late, really has me placing some serious doubts on this one. But there is one other lead that points back in the other direction for this being genuine. And that was when I searched Alabama to see if there's any location with Lagoon in it. And there was. Lagoon Park. When looking at Lagoon Park in Alabama, it doesn't seem to check out. He specifically mentions not being near any people for a couple of miles, but if you look, there is civilization everywhere. Looking at places nearby though reveals that it does get much more rural. Another important detail the original poster mentioned is that there were cliffs by the house that he resided in. So my next step was to search up cliffs in Alabama, and this is where my mind was blown. The city of Wetumpka has cliffs. This city is actually famous for how these cliffs came to be too. It actually happened because of a gigantic meteor from 85 million years ago. This city is very close to Lagoon, but is much more rural, which checks out. This would have to be a striking coincidence and truly does make me believe that this story is in fact real. What really sucks though is that even if people were to investigate this area, the chances that the house he lived in still being there is just so slim, because after all, 45 years was a long time ago. This meteor site was only conclusively confirmed in 1999, and now there are tours for it, but back in the days of the poster, this place was empty, and so was the surrounding area. There was, and for the most part still, is nothing but trees. With all that being said though, does this revelation make me believe in the story? No, it doesn't. To me, there's too much to convince me otherwise. Like we said already, the Reddit account was conveniently created right before the first post, and the character around it is naturally built up as someone who doesn't go on the internet too much. In fact, we even covered a mystery a few months ago which did something very similar. That grammar, vocabulary again was another humongous red flag. Like, how is somebody who has never taught proper vocab and grammar, and someone who again, still is showing us right here that his grammar and spelling is quite bad, is also going to throw out words like provocative or lax to name a few. There are also multiple moments where his grammar can break and sound pretty normal. It's all inconsistent and breaks the immersion and reality of this all. But that's not even all though. The style in which it was written, it also places severe doubts on its authenticity for me. It seems to be written in this way where it's using a lot of detail, but also not a lot of detail at the same time, if that makes sense. Like, in reality, the post itself could have been 1 or 2 paragraphs, but it was stretched way out with information to try and up its chances of being real. And to do this, of course, he conveniently can't remember the name of the place, keeps the location just vague enough to be able to theorize with, and give us a boatload of other information to try and up the realism, such as the number of people, the religious names of the people, which, as a side note, how could he remember all of them perfectly but not the name of the place, and other things like the tree marks and the number of the other places like his. It just seems like these things were added to increase the reader's likelihood of believing it. And then there are things like the fact he had no idea what day he was born, but he knows he was 12 in 1975. And what about his birth certificate? So yeah, this mystery is easily debunked. While interesting, this story is absolutely not real. There are just way too many things convincing otherwise, whether that be grammar, the plot holes, or the convenient Reddit creation date and character as a result of that. There is no way this is real. Hi, and welcome to Debunk File. My name is Sep, and today we're going to be talking about a Redditor who, with the snap of a finger, vanished off the platform. I'm sure you can all tell by now, but as of late, we've been covering much more historical mysteries than usual, straying away from what we would usually do, which is cover internet mysteries. And this is for a couple of reasons. Firstly, we just find them really interesting, and two, good internet mysteries are, well, difficult to get your hands on, to say the least. We still do look for them just as often as we did before, but it's close to impossible to find anything interesting anymore. This is also the moment where I'll suggest that if you do have any cool internet mysteries you want us to cover in the future, do not hesitate to tell us. With that being said though, for the first time in a while, we did find one. On our usual searches for internet mysteries, Reddit is the place we scour the most, but when looking, 90% of what you will see is either cliché ARGs or small-scale oddities that just never strike us as being too interesting. We've said this before, but finding mysteries might actually be the hardest part of the entire channel. It really isn't easy at all. On one of these scours that we often partake in, we finally found a mystery that really struck us as being both fascinating, but incredibly creepy at the same time. Here's the post I first found. The headline states, "We'll be entering the catacombs in a few hours-ish." When reading the post in question, not only is it clear that he is talking about the Paris catacombs, but there are loads of other creepy things in the post itself. To summarize it, he mentions wanting to go into the catacombs to stop a portal, and even says that he will make a tutorial about how he is going to do this. He even mentions beings from inside the catacombs that apparently will not be able to stop him. The final takeaway from this post, and something that is often seen in other posts revolving him, is that he has had some people during the entirety of this situation giving him advice and help on how he is going to enter the catacombs, and shut down this supposed portal. When looking at some of his other posts, which we will truly delve into more later, I found out that these people were all in a Discord server with him, and not a single invite link for said server is anywhere to be found, at least in all the places I looked. The creepiest part about everything here, this was the OP's final ever post on Reddit, over a month ago. If this man truly set out for the catacombs like he claimed to in this post, what happened? Now, let me just say what I'm all sure you skeptics are screaming in your heads right now. Oh, this is clearly just a fake account trying to get attention, similar to the average ARG you find everywhere. And with me also being quite the skeptic, trust me, I thought the same exact thing when I saw this original post. But in this specific instance, that does not seem to be the case at all, and the truth could be much darker. Like we said, the final post was an entire month ago, but the creepiest part about all of this is that his post history does not at all suggest that this is the works of somebody simply trying to bring an ARG off the ground. It suggests something much, much darker. The first post was one that I really didn't think of much, but it actually becomes important later. It's entitled, "Saw someone get run over by a train and didn't feel anything." He mentions being on his way to work when someone was unfortunately struck by a train, and as the post title suggests, he didn't seem to feel anything for some reason, and this weirded both him out and his passengers. This doesn't seem too important yet, but much later down the line, it's gonna come back. On his next post, we can see a huge, unsettling red alarm. On the advice subreddit, a post entitled, "Seeing and Hearing Things That Aren't There" was created. In this post, most of the hallucinations he sees are quite small, such as seeing a small spider in his peripheral vision, but he did mention a pretty big hallucination he had from a few years ago, where he mentions seeing the silhouette of a small child on all fours charging at him, only for it to vanish when he fully looked at it. He mentions that happening one other time with a full-size silhouette. Unfortunately, these hallucinations aren't just limited to his sight. He also hears things. According to him, all throughout his childhood, he would hear a very specific noise, which has since vanished over time. Another rare noise he hears is the barking of a dog scarily close to him when he is trying to close his eyes to sleep. In the comments, he also mentions them increasing in frequency. The most important takeaway from this post comes at the end though, where he states that he is not a believer of the supernatural, which greatly contradicts the final post he made, where he literally mentioned going to the catacombs to stop a portal. A couple months after this, his next post of importance seemingly came out of absolute nowhere, where he asks what to do after seeing interdimensional beings. This post came a few months after his first hallucination post, and in the span between these two posts, everything else was completely normal. Like posts to various gaming subreddits, but over here, he seems to have taken a complete change. After this, nearly every post would just get crazier and crazier. A post from 4 months ago had the OP asking Reddit how he could banish interdimensional beings, and while the post itself is now gone, the comments gave away a lot of very important details. Someone reasonably wasn't sure if this guy was for real or not, and that's when the OP responded by saying, "I know how it sounds, I get that a lot. I don't blame you if you don't believe me. My coworkers sure didn't." For context, the names mentioned are Discord aliases. If there's people on Reddit with those names, I don't know if they're the same. Naturally, people looked through his post history, and since he had a history of seeing hallucinations, which is when his worries grew, as they were thinking that these Discorders were just enabling him. The part that grabs my attention the most about this all is the response from the OP, where he says to the commenter that he may be right. The way he responds to the comments consistently casts doubt on this being a fake story to me. It just seems too realistic. So, the story ends there, right? The OP realized that he was being taken advantage of by malicious online trolls that convinced him his hallucinations were real and got himself some much needed help. I really hope it ended that way, but it didn't. His next post of intrigue opens a whole new layer to this rabbit hole. It's another post about him asking how to get rid of interdimensional beings, and while that sounds like much of the same of what we have already read, there are a few things here that, like I said, give this mystery a whole new layer. First off, he mentions these Discorders he had been frequently speaking to again, and they actually told him to give a significant part of himself, and in particular, recommended his finger. At the end, he also states that he is glad to know that these aren't hallucinations like he once thought, and were in fact interdimensional beings the whole time. This is really unsettling, and it's showing, at least to me, that these people he has been talking to are actively enabling him. Again, another thing that makes me feel that this post isn't just bait is the fact that after this, he'd put up completely normal posts on the Friday the 13th subreddit still, and when combining that with how the post began and how he responds to comments, it's increasingly likely to me that this is in fact genuine, unlike pretty much every other Reddit mystery we've ever covered. Not long after this, he made a post to the paranormal board that seemed to not stand out among his array of other posts, talking about the same things, until you read in. He mentions going on to meds and them not working at all, and now wonders if these sights that he still sees, even with the meds, are ghosts instead of interdimensional beings. From this point forward, things get way worse. 2 months after that, he put a post into the Ask subreddit, where he once again is back to mentioning these interdimensional demons, and asks if there is a hell portal in the Paris catacombs. He was quickly told to get back on his meds, and this is when our OP said that since they didn't make much of a difference, these beings are actually there. He says that the illness was a distraction to prevent him from making the journey to shut down the portal, and now that this distraction has been foiled, they created this pandemic to shut down the airports. What he is saying is very obviously the regurgitated words of the Discorders, because I'm assuming that after the Reddit thread where he said that he was going to get help, he told these Discorders about that, and this was definitely the information they gave him to convince him to stay with them. After this, we got a post saying, "Do I have schizophrenia? No." This is another post where he is reassuring us that because the meds didn't make a difference, he doesn't have schizophrenia and everything he has been seeing is real. The most important thing to note is that the post was made on a subreddit called r/dimensional breach. This is a tiny subreddit created by our OP himself, and as you'll see, it's going to give us a lot of information for the future, mostly revolving around the aforementioned Discord. After this, he made a post on the advice subreddit once again, asking for advice on traversing unofficial routes into the Paris catacombs. While no one answered that question, our OP did give some information regarding his plan. He mentions needing an alternative route for getting into the catacombs due to lockdown, and also lets us know his equipment for the journey. He has one big metal industrial flashlight, 20 turpentine holy ritual flasks, one sleeping bag, one Bible, 2 cans of beans, one buck knife for the cans, and some chalk to mark his path and avoid getting lost. On the Paris Catacombs subreddit, he made a post saying much of the same. The only difference is that he specifically stated that his journey would begin in just a few days. This is one of the posts that wound up getting quite a bit of attention, and naturally, of course, almost everybody was telling him that there is no portal there and to not go. But one reply definitely stood out to me, and I find worth noting. When the subject of using chalk to make his way back, somebody replied to the OP saying that monsters can track him with the chalk, and he is shocked to hear this, claiming that this comment probably saved his life and will now not use chalk. On his Dimensional Breach subreddit, he once again went over the gear setup, but at the end he said something that most definitely struck worry in me. He says that he will be brought over to Paris by a group of gentlemen, which is something that obviously had me fearing the worst. From here on out, you'll start seeing a huge shift in the way the OP types. Before, while obviously saying some absolutely insane stuff, you'd notice that his sentences were very coherent and featured little in the way of grammar issues. This now completely changes. In a comment reply to somebody, he mentions getting to a big building. Whether this is a hotel or not is pretty unclear, but he says a couple went through his things and forbid him from keeping his pickaxe and shovel. Towards the end of this, he mentions continuing the journey on his own and forgetting to bring money with him, so he only has a little food, no shelter, and is going to Paris on foot. Now in this comment, he mentions currently being in Calais, which is in France, and since he mentions having to go to Paris on foot, naturally, I wanted to see how long it would take to get there, and well, it's 55 hours on foot. Yikes. After this, we see a post on his Dimensional Breach subreddit, and here he says he is currently hiding in a dumpster to stay away from the dimensional beings. This again highlights just how far he is deteriorating. And at last, we return to the final post. This one we showed at the beginning. He said he'd enter the catacombs in a few hours. He said it would take maybe a day or two and he'd return with videos. He still hasn't come back. While the story is nearly over, there's a little bit more to unpack. Somebody mentions referring to a Discord user who also has a Reddit, and this guy actually jumped into the conversation and had some interesting things to say. I thought this sub died out. I didn't participate in the troll OP. I only joined the Discord because I know SnappedFingers IRL. The only thing I did was getting him to post online because he was hung up on an incident that happened when I was driving him to work. Simply put, the man needed but refused to talk to a professional when he needed to. I'm not even in the Discord anymore. I was ejected by the 2 sick fucks who took it too far. This guy also mentions the 2 Discord users convincing SnappedFingers that everybody else was possessed, so he'd only listen to them. He also says that he was unbalanced, so he couldn't even drive, and stated that he wanted to wash his hands of the matter. One last thing he says is that he used to drive SnappedFingers to work, and this is when that whole train incident happened. He also mentioned SnappedFingers having too much pride to post an accurate account of his own reaction, which suggests that the initial post of the OP not feeling anything when he saw someone being hit by a train was false. Now I must say that we have to take this guy's comments with a grain of salt because it's literally impossible to confirm that he has any relation to this at all. For all we know, he could be a jacker, and since his account has been deleted, I can't look into his history. There is one more moment to this story though, and it comes from another Redditor. This time, he isn't claiming to know RRP in real life. He claims to have actually been a part of the Discord and would answer questions revolving that. Some naturally asked who SnappedFingers was, and while he didn't give a full name, he said it was Richard P. He did mention that he was schizophrenic and extremely gullible, which is something we clearly have already seen, and also mentions paying off a $700 locksmith, which to me at least sounds absolutely ridiculous. As proof, he did give screenshots from the Discord server, but his posts have been absolutely very suspect to me. If he is truly involved like he claims he is, it would cast doubt on this entire story. The other possibility is that he is also a jacker. However, he did give Discord proof. It is easy to fake that stuff though, but I do wonder why he would, because in the grand scheme of things, this mystery is very unknown. This user also deleted his account, just like the previous guy. Overall, that's all to this saga. It's been over a month at the time of writing this, and SnappedFingers has still not returned. Those two users up to this point are the only valuable pieces to the story. So with all that out of the way, let's get to the mystery at hand. Obviously, the only thing we are trying to figure out here is if these posts are real or not. If they are in fact real, we'd like to find some definite evidence of this, and if it's fake, we'll attempt to do the same. There's nothing else to say, let's just do this. This isn't a very complicated mystery. The thing we're here to find out is, of course, whether it's real or not. If it is, what exactly happened to this guy? Is he in prison? Or worse? And if this isn't real, was it just an elaborate story? Time to figure this out. When figuring out if this is real, there were a couple of things we had to do. Before searching if there had been any arrests in the catacombs this year, we just wanted to go over everything we've seen so far. As stated earlier, his descent into madness seemed frighteningly natural, which is what made this story stand out so much more to me than any other Reddit mysteries I always come across. Obviously, this could have been the works of a particularly good writer, but to me, that just didn't seem to be the case. Well, until those two other accounts came in. These two accounts are tough to judge, because as we said earlier, there is a chance they weren't involved at all, and since both accounts have since been deleted, I can't really prove for sure that these accounts were ever involved. What I will say is that them deleting both profiles soon after being questioned on their validity is incredibly suspicious. Unfortunately, I do think these accounts are actually connected after all. Remember that ridiculous mention of a $700 locksmith? Yeah, I thought that sounded absolutely ridiculous, but something that flew right under my nose was the fact that the final post actually indirectly mentions this locksmith. He says that he sent the lockman to put it back where he found it. This right here really signals to me that despite being incredibly convincing for the surface, this may not be real after all. It doesn't end there though, of course. The next step was, of course, to check out if there had been any arrests in the catacombs from this time span, or if worse come to worse, any deaths. When researching this, I found out that the catacombs actually has a special police force, and they've been patrolling the place since 1980 and apparently find up to 100 people a week that illegally enter the catacombs. This is an outrageous amount, but there are a ton of people that like going down there for various different reasons. With that being said though, things changed during the lockdown. During lockdown, the place was closed and actually just opened back up as recently as June 15th, but during the lockdown, it was unclear as to whether or not they were still around. I'd assumed that they were, but nothing confirmed or denied this. The most important thing though is that the vast majority of the time they find people in the catacombs, they don't arrest them, they find them. One of the theories surrounding this OP is that he was arrested and not that he died. While there's still a very slim possibility that he was arrested, if this were to actually be real, there's not a high probability that this is the case. So if this was real and he wasn't arrested, the most notable other theory, and one that is more popular than the aforementioned one, is the fact that he died down there. It makes sense as to why this theory is so popular. This man is severely mentally ill, and when you take someone like that and put him in an endless maze, the results are not going to be pretty. I'm here to reassure you that the chances of him dying assuming this is real is incredibly low. First off, despite what you may think, dying in the catacombs is actually extremely rare. Because of the cataflix and the fact that such a high amount of people enter here illegally, he would have likely been found by now. One thing that I can hear coming from a mile away already is the fact that the catacombs are locked down, and we already mentioned earlier the fact that we can't prove the cataflix were still patrolling here, or not. Meaning if he somehow died down here, there would be no cops to save him. The problem with this theory, though, is that the catacombs opened back up on June 15th, meaning he would have absolutely been found by now if he was somehow dead. If this is somehow real, our OP didn't die here. That means if this story was real, there was only one more possibility for what could have happened. And that is, he somehow snuck in and snuck out without being caught. But then if that were the case, why did he never come back to Reddit? Even when his mental health was deteriorating like crazy, he was still very active on Reddit, so why wouldn't he make any more updates when he clearly mentioned his desire for shooting the entire process on film? To me, it seems that his sudden disappearance was clearly meant to insinuate his demise. But if this were to be real, you could make the case that maybe he found help and that's why he disappeared. But then again, he mentioned traveling here via a plane, so that doesn't seem likely at all. One other thing worth noting is the fact that this story seems to sound a lot like the plot of the movie, As Above, So Below. This is something that other Redditors mentioned, and it's absolutely true. In case you don't know, the plot to that movie, it follows somebody seeking out a specific artifact located deep in the catacombs, and as the main characters in the film make their way there, they go insane. I shouldn't need to explain why that sounds so familiar, but it's definitely something worth noting. So with all these theories regarding this Redditor's post being real, seemingly relatively impossible, I'm very confident that this was actually a story. However, a much more convincing one than usual. So, consider this file debunked. While the story was a great read, that is all it was, a story.
Hi, and welcome to Debunk File. My name is Sep, and today we're going to be covering an incredibly disturbing case involving the Redditor, Lady Iris. Before this video begins, I have to provide a quick warning. In case the title didn't make it clear enough, this video is going to involve the discussion of some horrible things happening to cats, as well as some other horrific behaviors on display. This truly is not for the faint of heart, and if you find this subject matter to be too much, you may want to click off here. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Now back to the video. The internet is a place that is so large, it's next to impossible to truly comprehend it. It's estimated that approximately 4.9 billion people have access to the internet, a number that is truly staggering. This number means that over half of the entire population has internet access on this planet. And with that number, it means that some horrible things tend to slip through the cracks. But if you've watched us for a while, you already know this. We have discovered and covered some pretty disturbing things throughout our channel's run, but out of all of our internet finds ever, this may take the cake as the single most disturbing one of them all. You see, on Reddit, there are a number of subreddits that have to do with getting disturbing things off your chest. In one of our previous videos, we went through one of those, that being the Confession subreddit. In there, thanks to the anonymity of the platform, people consistently say some pretty deranged things, and the subreddit that this video resides in is the same way. Tonight's video predominantly took place on the Morbid Questions subreddit. Obviously, this subreddit has to do with asking questions that are, well, morbid. In a way, we all have these types of questions, ones that are very messed up that we want to ask, but we just can't because it would be too inappropriate to say. In that sense, the subreddit does have some use, and I can completely understand its existence and purpose. However, it isn't even really just about the posts a subreddit like this can show. While there are some serious red flags that arise from some of these posts, it's also about the people that it brings to light. In our case here, Reddit saw someone that is truly depraved. Tonight, we're going to go through the entire saga of Lady Iris, the Reddit cat killer. As far as we can tell, the first post Lady Iris ever made was in March of 2015. Believe it or not, finding the initial account here was extraordinarily difficult, and I actually got it wrong twice. If there are earlier accounts of posts, it's because the archives didn't pick them up, but as it stands, this is as far back as we go. While she's best known for her posts on the Morbid Questions subreddit, it appears that a ton of her early ones were actually on Ask Reddit as well. As another interesting tidbit, this original account I found isn't even called Lady Iris, which is what she would be best known as. It's actually called Allegretta, and some of the early posts don't even get into the subjects that she'd be best known for later. Lots of these early posts were pretty run-of-the-mill questions for these subreddits, and were certainly a little odd, but they weren't necessarily things you'd completely stop in your tracks for. This all changed in April of 2015. Back on the aforementioned Confession subreddit, she made a post entitled,
"Killing insects is fun and stress relieving for me."
This certainly isn't even as close to as bad our things are going to get, but it's the first instance of a post coming along that will surely get you a little uneasy. Things wouldn't initially get weirder instantly after this post, but one thing that did happen was for Lady Iris to question empathy for the first time, which is something that will become extremely common from this point forward, and something that is certainly interesting, to say the least. April of 2016 bore witness to the first serious red flag. The post was titled,
Reddit, how do you know that one of your loved ones is not truly a serial killer who has covered their tracks very well?
and if that title wasn't weird enough, the comment she makes after it is what truly shook me to my core for the first time. This thread begins with someone stating that they truly believe their grandfather may have fit the bill for the post's title, and Lady Iris seems a little excited to hear the details. If that wasn't weird enough, her final comment on the matter is sure to widen your eyes.
I guess I would find it really cool if one of my relatives had been a murderer, but then again, it's something I've always wanted to carry out.
As terrifying as this is, it's only the beginning. From this point on, questions definitely got noticeably weirder, especially since she found the Morbid Questions subreddit at around this time, the place she's known for best. Stuff like,
What's wrong with enjoying the thought of killing someone if you never plan to act on it?
and
What do you think you'd enjoy the most about killing someone?
are just a few examples of constantly repeating questions that would be asked each and every single day to the Morbid Questions subreddit, where she would quickly become known as a result of the constant posting. As you may guess, it gets pretty repetitive to sift through some of these since so many of them are similar, but there were a few noticeable outliers that are worth mentioning in greater detail. And they sure are terrifying. One of these questions is our first mention of cats. The question is titled,
What would physically happen to a cat if you nuked it in the microwave?
I was going to ask why the hell she asked a question like this, but in the replies it becomes clear. She just wanted to hear an in-depth account of the suffering of one. One other question that also involved kittens was,
Do you believe it is worse to murder kittens than it is to murder people?
This question had quite the interesting reply as well. When giving her own input on the matter, Lady Iris says,
I don't know. I think a lot of people deserve to die. I also think that murder could be thrilling, but kittens are just so innocent.
At first I thought her referring to the kittens in this way meant that she would not want to harm them when compared to humans, but with knowing what we'll know later, I think it may actually mean the opposite. However, nothing would prepare us for the final question asked on this account. It said,
Do you believe it is morally wrong to buy a hamster just so you can enjoy cutting it up and killing it?
Absolutely terrifying. And in the comments, she gets into her reasonings for this. According to her, she'd like to satisfy her fetish for murder but hasn't done it yet and doesn't know if she will. Naturally, this post inflicted pure panic on everybody that saw it. There were people telling her to seek help, others that were in awe of what they were witnessing, and it ended with Lady Iris being shadow banned from the sub, where she would then delete her account. And well, I truly wish things ended there, but it still gets worse from here on out. She would of course make a new account after, where she would adopt the name Lady Iris for the first time, the name that she's most well known for today. One interesting thing here is that this account is the only one that isn't removed. It still wound up getting abandoned later on, but it remains open to this day. I dug through this entire account, and it was basically the same few types of questions over and over again, but my only question was, why was this one abandoned? As like I said before, it was never banned or deleted like the others. Whatever the case, it's still baffling to see the consistency at which these questions are being asked, and even scarier to know that it still doesn't end here. Lady Iris 2 came next, and this was the account that would hold arguably the largest number of posts, as well as the most disturbing ones yet. Many of the posts still revolved around those same few types of questions, but there were some others in here that truly stood out. The first of which had to do with a question asked regarding how she can deal with her urges to take a life in a safe and legal way. And in the comment section of this post, something different than what we have gotten accustomed to seeing happened. Instead of immediately getting on the defensive like she would often do, on one of her replies she says,
"It's not that I can't suppress it, I can and I usually do. I guess that's part of the reason why I'm asking for advice online, because I want to find a way to get some pleasure and indulge some of these fantasies, but without ruining anybody's life over it. It's not that I expect to be validated, but I do feel that one should be able to openly discuss ideas and thoughts that make people uncomfortable. In some ways, it's better that I air it and I'm open about it, because it leaves less to fester and it also gives people an idea where I'm coming from. That being said, in my response to the user below, I mentioned that I've strongly considered seeking help and at least hope to find someone who will listen to me without judgment. But with a busy schedule right now, I don't want to invest time and money unless I know the experience will be worthwhile. I also don't want to be committed or given medication or marked as a danger to society just because I have some very vivid fantasies."
This response leaves me unsure of what to think. On one hand, it seems at the very least encouraging that this time around she's aware of these behaviors not being okay, and possibly doing something about them. However, a reply to this comment helped illustrate something about this comment that is, for lack of a better term, horrifying.
"It's not that I can't suppress it. I can and I usually do. I can and I usually do. I usually do. Usually."
And on just the following post, we got to see what this usually may have been referring to. In this post, she was essentially upset at the constant downvoting she received on the subreddit, as in her mind, these were morbid questions and she was sticking to the name of the sub. Of course, users were quick to remind her of her psychopathic behaviors, and in one of her replies, we got our first mention of a behavior actually being carried out.
"Actually, I don't enjoy the idea of torturing animals. I did kill a cat once to try it, that's true. But as a rule, I don't really go out of my way to hurt animals, and most likely won't ever do it again."
You heard that right. The same user that claimed all her thoughts were mere fantasies has now admitted to taking the life of an animal in the past. The thread doesn't even end there either though. She then is quick to fire back by saying that since there was no impulse, since the decision was made all by her, that she can't be mentally ill, and that this action, while evil, doesn't make her brain any different, since she still knows right from wrong. Regarding the cats, there are sadly a couple posts that are directly about her experience and thoughts regarding them. One of which is,
"Do you personally believe it's as morally bad to torture or kill animals as it is to harm a human? Why or why not?"
She doesn't make any direct references to what she has done to cats in the past here, but it was worth mentioning. There's also the post of,
"Has anyone here ever made a game out of trying to hit as many small animals with your car as possible?"
Again, she didn't really reply to anything, but it's still an incredibly disturbing post to see pop up. Then we finally have,
"If skinning cats were a job, what hourly wage would you require to do it?"
In the comments of this extremely disturbing post title, someone stated that they could never do such a thing, to which Lady Iris replied,
"You would not like what I did then."
After this, the commenter immediately stated that they hoped this was just a one-time thing, to which Lady Iris says,
"It probably was, because animal killing is far less interesting. Also, a lot of cleanup for a quick thrill."
In early 2017, this account would disappear. Believe it or not, she was actually a moderator on the Morbid Questions subreddit, which is something that kind of baffles me. Although I guess she did ask the most morbid of questions. Still though, knowing that a literal cat killer was modding a sub for a while blows my mind. For a while, things were actually quiet. This account was either deleted by her or banned 4 years ago, and for what seemed like forever, she truly wasn't returning. Perhaps this was finally the end of one of the most disturbing things I have ever seen on Reddit, but there would be one more occurrence. Fast forwarding all the way to 2020, posts began finally returning that looked all too familiar. After over 3 years of absence from Reddit, it appears she was finally back, as if she never even left, asking those same disturbing types of questions that we saw all those years ago. The final post would be in November of 2020, where she was swiftly banned, and as of now, that is the most recent occurrence of Lady Iris on the internet. But despite her being gone, for the time being at least, there are still a number of questions to ask yourself regarding everything we have seen here today. Something we quickly have to address is the amount of people that question the validity of these posts. Tons and tons of people actually thought these were just all trolling and bait. I understand how Reddit is and the attention-seeking nature of many people on the platform. If you've watched us in the past, we've quite literally covered a few Reddit mysteries where it wound up being just that. But in this instance, the likelihood of that being the case seems extremely low. I suppose it's true that we don't have any legitimate, bona fide proof of anything happening here, but the consistency and sheer volume of the activity here just does not line up with some troll. It's clearly not the case this time, but I just thought I'd mention it really quickly since I saw it being said so much. Of course, the first true question here is, well, what happened to cause her to disappear for 3 whole years? And more so than that, what does this all mean? The reason both of these questions are so important is because Reddit served as her outlet for these feelings for a number of years. Without the platform, what is that outlet? This is a really disturbing question to me because we are already well aware of her history. She expressed extreme desire in killing a hamster for a while, and then literally admitted to killing a cat just to see what it was like. For that first question, it's truly impossible to say what happened that caused this 3-year-long absence. Perhaps she was truly annoyed at the Redditors that rightfully opposed her viewpoints so often and just felt she had to get off. Maybe during that time, she found a new way of expressing these feelings. For better, there are a million possibilities for why she vanished for 3 whole years, and even why she isn't that active today either. But at the end of the day, they'd just be theories. We'd have no way of proving anything. We'd only be able to speculate. All we truly know is that she did eventually wind up coming back, and while it has been many months once again, there is a possible chance that she could return once more. Beginning with that second question of what that all means, overall, everything about this reminds me of one specific person, Luca Magnotta. If you don't know who this individual is, he had a long presence on the internet, first beginning with an infamous, incredibly disturbing video that depicted him murdering some kittens in one of the worst ways imaginable. The similarities reside in how everything began with them both. Both stories began on the internet, where they'd very frequently post things, and both of them got much worse as they went on. Lady Iris definitely eased into the behavior we saw by the end, and with Luca, what started with cats ended with a man. This is my greatest fear in finding something like this. The behaviors displayed by Lady Iris truly get under my skin, as she has repeatedly said that the only thing holding her back from murder is the law. That's it. What if that thought process changes one day? She'd say over and over again that these things are just fantasies and would never become anything more than that, but they already did. She killed a living, breathing animal, and got a momentary rush from it. And there are countless stories that show humans usually serve as that next step eventually. It just so happens that Luca Magnotta's in particular bore some major similarities to me, so I felt I needed to make that connection. More so, going back to that question of the online presence, if these disturbing posts truly were that main way of getting these feelings out, would we actually rather them happen than not happen?
That's a complex question that I really don't know the answer to, but it's worth asking every single time we make a video like this.
We point back to the anonymous nature that the internet can provide, and it's worth doing once again in this instance. There isn't anything that could be realistically done here due to the fact. All we can do is hope they'd get help someday regarding these feelings, but by their own logic we saw during all this, that seems very unlikely to happen. While her fantasy logic was proven wrong a number of times due to the aforementioned actions she admitted to doing, hopefully she's at least telling the truth regarding actual people. But the fact that I am not 100% certain of that fact is truly scary. She also mentioned how she acts as a person a number of times during this all, explaining herself as friendly, extroverted, and well-liked by her peers. This all truly goes to show how much more there is to people than what is shown off in the surface. Overall, this concludes the story of the Reddit cat killer. This was most definitely the most disturbing thing we've ever covered from the internet, and sadly, it still has many more questions than it does answers. I guess the only thing we can hope for at this rate is that she experiences a change in logic once again, and truly gets some help regarding the feelings we've seen on display. As it stands, this was one of the most insane deep dives into the human mind we have seen yet. Hi, and welcome to Debunk File. My name is Sepp, and today we're going to be talking about the tragic tale of Annie and Eric. Before we start this video, I want to thank all of you for 25,000 subscribers. We are currently getting all of your scary stories for our next video. We are incredibly excited to hear all of your scariest stories, so be sure to send them in soon. As for now, it's time to explore a tale of love and heartbreak on one of our favorite places on the internet, Reddit. Now, Reddit is one of the most accessible places across the internet, as I'm sure all of you watching know. Beneath the thousands of subreddits on the platform, some of them seek to meet a simple goal: making friends or relationships. As such, users have actually made lifelong friends on the website, especially on the r/r4r board, which is where our story begins.
New chat channel for Annie and Eric.
I can't wait for a second life where we meet first and are all there for each other.
I'm doing my best. It's not been an easy 3 weeks.
I just don't think I can go along.
It really does seem possible that he might have done something horrible to himself. It all started one day with a post on the aforementioned r/r4r board, where Eric created a post stating that he would like to create a get-together where he could get multiple people some pizza and hang out. Not long after, he got a reply from a user named Another Little Piece, who is later referred to as Annie, which we will be calling her from here. Annie loves the idea, but unfortunately she doesn't live close enough to actually be a part of it. Despite this, she thinks that Eric and her would get along, in her own words.
I think sometimes it would be nice to talk platonically about mutually interesting topics with someone here, and more than just a comment or two.
The two things of note here is that she specifically mentions them being strictly platonic, and to not use the Reddit personal messages. Annie's next message was explaining the reason why she doesn't want a personal message back and forth, and it's the fact that she has a significant other and would rather just talk throughout the day on Reddit threads. Eric acknowledges Annie's significant other and proposes the idea of branches, or threads that get lost, where they would reply to each other a ton on until they get archived, which would prompt them to create a huge new branch. It's important to note that the first time they met, they talked on this original thread for a little while, and it has a lot of replies. But in comparison to other branches we will discuss, it's minuscule. Most of their conversations also have pretty long replies as well, which is another constant throughout their relationship. Branch 1 is the very beginning, and I'll be completely honest, it's quite mundane. The bulk of these first conversations are music recommendations, in-jokes, and them talking about their daily life. With that being said though, the mundaneness and the sheer size of it is still something to behold, as this branch literally has over 24,000 replies. Due to that, it's pretty much impossible to read everything, but with all we've seen and the nature of most conversations, it seems to be pretty clear that they both were starting to fall for each other. But due to Reddit's system, Branch 1 was soon lost.
New chat channel for Andy and Eric. Old one was archived. Andy can only guess that the thread itself has slid too far off the bottom of the page. I just got it's a piece of history now. It's too late to reply to it. This is my attempt at making a new thread for our branch. Is it okay?
In Branch 2, there are 2 replies that show they both have interest in something a bit less platonic. They both talk about just how much the other person means to them, in a very poetic Annie and Eric exchange. Some of these first messages and their underlying tones show off that they really think of each other as more than friends. Let this set the tone for the entire rest of the story. At this point, the whole thing starts to feel a little surreal. The deeper you get into their story, the more you realize that you are watching 2 seemingly real people slowly fall for each other. It's not too often that you see into the dynamics and interactions of 2 people on the internet like this. Really, the mundane nature of it just adds even more to this feeling. It's just the inner lives of 2 random strangers speaking of their lives to each other. It's nearly impossible to ever see something like this happen, and it only gets stranger from here. In Branch 3, it's very clear there's something between these 2. The first comments on this thread are full of the poetic love we've seen in the last 2 branches. In this branch, Eric and Annie both talk about their significant others. At one point, Annie explains that she is no longer with hers. I can't find the original posts about this situation since there's so much to look through, but it's mentioned in passing a lot. Eric extensively explains how he saw 2 people after first meeting Annie. It's odd that even though Annie is no longer with her significant other, both her and Eric still chat publicly. It's confusing, but could easily just be habit. They've both grown so accustomed to talking this way that changing it is just a waste of time. They enjoy it and seem to be comfortable doing it as well. In what would be the final branch, things were looking good for Eric and Annie throughout this time. Conversations went as they always did. There was still that sense of similarity and poetic bonding that we have grown so accustomed to seeing. But one day, Annie sends a long message completely out of left field about how she can't do this anymore. It's strange and comes out of nowhere, but her intentions seem clear.
For me, I just don't think I can go along, or whatever's the right word.
Eric is obviously upset and doing his best to fix it in any way he can. Annie brings up that
I was able to get to a point where I could not go into a pit when other women were brought up, but I was only able to do that when I held the nice things you said about me at arm's length so that I didn't let them in. That way, when the topic of other women came up, I wasn't hurting myself because I wasn't holding your words close to me at the time.
Eric bargains with Annie to stay and how he will limit himself when speaking of women so she won't have to be jealous. But Annie wants their relationship to be completely transparent, but that would mean she could potentially get hurt by hearing another woman's name. Annie is still clear and shows no sign of budging. Really, she's hurt just as much as he is, and these last few goodbyes are extremely sorrowful. In one of Annie's last messages, she mentions,
I can't wait for a second life where we meet first and are all for each other. That would be my past, the universe joy.
Which is one of the most upsetting things I have ever read. The whole concept of the second life was actually a very common theme with them. As for the two's last exchange,
I turn away from here. All my everything I can send, first, last, and everything.
The story of Eric and Annie does unfortunately end here, but in Eric's story, this is only the beginning.
He returns 4 days later with something that reminds him of Annie. 3 weeks later, he returns again.
I turned away from here. The hardest words I've ever heard. It's not been an easy 3 weeks. The world isn't vibrant. I'm always barely hanging on. I've just done my work, done my preparing for the Orlando trip. I leave after work tomorrow. I'm running the tracker on this trip. I started doing it for you, so I don't know what else to do but link the trip here. I'll miss you every day of this life.
At this point, Eric starts to return almost every day and replies to himself in hopes she'll return. Some of the posts are things that remind him of her, but some of them are like he's actually having a conversation with Annie without her even being there. Eric has a huge reply on the 1-year anniversary of them no longer talking. He looks back on that night and describes in detail about how badly he felt then and still does now. Eric then starts to reply to her old messages again as if she's still here. Except this time, they're very depressing and almost creepy messages. Eric makes the final branch for him and Annie despite her still being very much gone. Eric's final message ever read,
Hello, my best. A couple hours left of pizza post day. My time to write messages in your direction is coming to an end. It's pretty hard to face. But I've needed to face it for more than 2 years, eh? I'm on the Klamath Falls trip again, just like I was at one point during your being and the opportunity trip off the continent. I wrote to you every day during that one. This trip ends the day this branch thread turns 6 months and is locked. Maybe I'll just write on each of these final days. You know what it was like at the end. The prospect of not even having this stupid outlet for missing our days in the branch isn't very easy to face. It's a bit of a duh statement, isn't it? Were it easy, then I would have never written once after you turned away. Oh well. This life's been a bit of a mess, no reason to think anything would work out okay.
And as for this sad yet disturbing tale, this is our endpoint. Eric's final post was over 3 years ago now, and since that happened, this whole thing has received a solid amount of attention on Reddit as being one of the most disturbing yet sad things on the entire platform. It's easy to see how people became so fascinated in this mystery, but being a mystery, there are also a number of questions needing answers, so we're going to attempt to answer a few of these burning questions. By far the most common question in this mystery is, well, what happened to Eric? That last post gets right into our first theory as to why he hasn't posted in over 2 years. As sad as it is, we're all thinking the same thing, and that is maybe he committed suicide. His last post was very upsetting, and it really does seem possible that he might have done something horrible to himself. It seems like the most plausible and is what the resounding answer seems to be when the mystery is discussed. But as it turns out, it may not actually be our answer after all. Believe it or not, that comment from 3 years ago actually wasn't the final piece of activity on Eric's account. Eric had one last post about a year ago. It wasn't really of much importance, but the fact that he actually came back is the most shocking part. Deep in old replies, he did come back. I'm going to have to say the suicide theory is pretty much debunked with his return. When he came back, it wasn't anything creepy or even sad. It was just a generic response to some random Ask Reddit thread. That would mean that the last post, while still really sad, didn't have as sinister of connotations as many people thought. As said in it, he stated that he would never reply again until his final branch ended. And well, it looks like he pretty much just kept to that promise. It appears that Eric is truly living his days without Reddit, now for the most part, and we hope he's doing much better with this change. It also has to be said that Annie has been completely off Reddit since that night. She never commented or had any activity on any other boards since, and is still completely missing and would be impossible to prove or disprove anything about her well-being and whereabouts. It's of course possible that she simply deleted Reddit to escape all of this, but we hope she's doing okay too. It's not too often that we see people wondering about her as well, so we figured we'd throw that out there.
One other popular theory, and one I'm sure a lot of you have, is the theory that these two are actually the same person this whole time. Personally, it's a tough shot. The main pointer towards this theory is just how similar they type and talk to each other. Personally, while writing this, I'd get confused and have to look at who wrote what, since they write nearly identically. With that being said though, they both had very intricate lives, and with each reply being almost a paragraph, it's pretty easy to say that these were two distinct people. The replies they'd send were so specific about the happenings in their lives that I find it very unlikely that this could be the inner workings of one mind. Were they very, very similar people? Absolutely. But the same person? Again, it's just unlikely. Naturally, another theory that would follow suit with something like that is, what if this is an art project or an ARG? Maybe this is some sort of weird art project of the human condition or something pretentious like that. To that I say, no. Again, the sheer volume of replies with absolutely no sort of attention whatsoever really debunks this claim. The final theory in that same ballpark is whether it's all a troll or some bait posts. Again, this one is debunked for that exact same reason as the last one. There is no way a troll would spend this amount of effort with this amount of detail. Really though, those are all the main questions regarding this mystery. The tale of Eric and Annie is uniquely tragic. It shows both the power of the internet and the harm of it at the very same time. The internet gives you the possibility to meet people you would never encounter in real life, and that is a special thing. For Eric and Annie, these were two people that were so similar and almost couldn't imagine a life without each other after they met. But then, on the other side of the coin, it shows how quick these things can end too. The downside to it all is that it only takes one button. As it stands, it's an interesting tale between two people that unfolded in front of everyone. Truly something you don't see every day. Eric and Annie, if by some chance you are watching this, I hope you do in some caliber find each other.
This is going to do it for this compilation. We hope you enjoyed the stranger side of Reddit in one big video. There is more content coming, and of course our annual Halloween video during Debunktober. If this happens to be your first time on this channel, make sure to subscribe. As always, my name is Sep from Debunk File. See you guys next time. Bye.